Welcome to Table Talk and Tumbleweeds.
I'm Pastor Joshua Bruns from Covenant Lutheran Church.
And I'm Pastor Lisa Stenmark from the Wheatland United Church of Christ. This is a weekly show where we explore local issues and concerns in the context of the Christian faith, mostly because we really believe that the Christian tradition has a lot to say about the experiences of people in rural America in general and Wheatland, Wyoming in particular.
And we also think that rural Wyoming has something to tell the church.
And that's a really important thing to add. And when we talk about our topic today, it will become clear why we think that.
And so you can find us on the radio, 11:30 in the morning Mondays on KYCN.
Yes.
And then we will have podcast availability if you've missed us or if you want to listen to it again.
So today's show, we're going to talk about the relationship between the rural church or rural churches and the broader church. And I think there's this, it's kind of interesting when we really started thinking about this, because there's this idea of this conflict, right, between urban and rural. And the first thing that I thought about that is like, oh, it's city mouse, country mouse. And then I realized, I mean, that's Aesop.
That is 2,500 years.
2,500 years ago, they were talking about the conflict between urban and rural. And then, of course, I have to say I prefer Beatrix Potter in part because I think what's important about her, she said, well, it's really just about different values, right? That city people do things their way, country people do things their way, and both sides think the other is crazy, but both sides are okay, right? So I think that there's this kind of, it's sort of, sometimes we think, oh, well, this is new. There's nothing new about it.
There's nothing new under the sun.
Yes. So I think what we did kind of want to do, though, is talk about how that conflict or that dissonance between urban experiences and rural experiences sort of impacts rural congregations and the broader church.
Yeah, because when you do look at the numbers, you look at the actual availability, pretty much every national church, denominational church in the U.S. has its headquarters in an urban area or at best a suburban area.
Yes.
That's where they're all located. It's where they're all centered. And this is part of the way that their relationship is built.
I was kind of checking it. And so, I used AI or something. And it was like, well, how many denominations are not in urban areas? And it listed several. And I was kind of surprised. And I said, well, and then it would say something like, Chevy Chase, Maryland, and I had to type back, seriously?
Is that rural?
Chevy Chase is not a city, and so then I had to modify it, and there are no national denominations that are not within 20 miles of a city center.
Right, and part of the argument is that if you're in charge of a national thing, you need transport in and out to all the places across the country, and that's an argument to be made. We can see the argument there, but what it does is that it extends the distance between those centers of power,
right,
and the actual people in the rural places. And so, when you're going to go visit the people of these places, you go to the cities. You don't go to the rural churches.
And I think that's, to me, what's kind of important in looking at this is that we often think of, UCC, United Church of Christ, or Lutherans, or other denominations as, they're the liberal churches or the progressive churches, and so they're the urban churches. But this is, like I said, it is true of every single denomination. So it's not just the ELCA that's urban, it is also
LCMS,
the Wisconsin
Synod,
LCMS, Seventh-day Adventists, but Disciples of Christ. So basically, Baptists. These are all have urban centers in their headquarters, and I think our text for today. So the question is, what does that do? And I think that our text that we want to look at today really addresses that in a kind of an interesting way. And the text is Matthew 9:35 through 10:8, and I have a little excerpt here. Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers to his harvest." Then Jesus summoned the 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits, to cast them out and to cure every disease and every sickness. "Go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. As you go, proclaim the good news. The kingdom of heaven has come. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those with a skin disease, cast out demons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." So just a little bit of a context here. In this text, Jesus is in Galilee. He's in which is a rural area, yes. Right? It's an area. It's much like Wheatland. It's an area of ranchers and farmers and fishing villages.
It's an outpost from the main big city down in Jerusalem.
It's the outpost of an outpost.
Yeah. Right. Well, Netzer from Nazareth is the place that's the new growth. Right?
Yes.
So they're building new stuff here.
Yes. So the people that he's talking about in here are the Am Haaretz, which literally, as you pointed out, means people of the land, right? Again, so these are the ranchers, the farmers, the fishing villages, etc. And he uses this interesting term. And I'm not really thrilled with the translation here, but the term is harassed and helpless, which really what the Greek conveys in here is that these are people who have been ground down.
Yes.
Right? They're not helpless. They have been beaten down and worn out, right? They are exhausted.
Yeah. This is not just a matter of rural life, which is hard and was even harder then.
Yes.
This is also a matter of the religious realities that they're living into, because there's expectations, and being distant from the center of power, being distant from the actual temple and the places of religious worship, everything is difficult. Everything is hard to do. And so it's not just one thing, it's another thing, and it's another thing. And I think that feels a little familiar sometimes in the rural world.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, boy, I wish that wind would just stop blowing. It's just, it's if it's not one thing, it's another. And it's physical, or it's cold, or it's hot, or it's drought, or I've got to go. I mean, there's always that sort of constant rhythm of rural life, of country life. But I think that what's important in our context is also noting that it's not just rural life that is hard. There's a real religious component to what Jesus is talking about here, right?
Yeah, so, in this time and place, it is becoming harder and harder and harder.
And harder. And the reason it's becoming harder, and this is the term that he used, is the sheep without a shepherd, right? And this comes from Ezekiel, right? And so Ezekiel 34, where he says the shepherds have abandoned the sheep, and the flock has been scattered. And this is what Jesus is referring to here. And what Ezekiel is talking about is the fact that religious leaders have kind of left people to themselves. They're not meeting the needs of the people, either physically or spiritually.
And there's parts of this where the leaders are doing this because they are more interested in themselves.
Yes.
We talk about the Sadducees and the Pharisees, which we'll get into in a minute, but the Sadducees especially are just absolutely centered on money, self. This is the one life I get. I'm going to enjoy it. And so the Sadducees have this reputation that they are the wealthy, powerful elite in charge of the temple who add field to field and house to house, devouring the houses of widows because money's money, right? Money's
money. Yeah, well, you borrow from the church, you got to expect to pay back, right?
Yeah, so the Sadducees are this aristocratic class that are very, very centered on the self.
The self. So and you sort of said it's a reputation. I think I think it's fair to say it's not just the reputation. I mean, it's who they are, right? They are the priestly class. They're urban, definitely urban.
Absolutely centered around the temple.
Yes, they are the elites. They're the ones with power. They're the ones with authority. But, and you've observed this to me before, the interesting thing is they don't show up a lot. and part of the reason they don't show up a lot is that they can't even be bothered to show up in the country and be evil.
Right. They are entirely
They're evil from a
urban.
distance.
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
All of their power is expressed through finance and not through...
Where does the the burnt offering come from? I don't know. Somewhere out there, those people out there giving us burnt offerings, you know. So there is this total disconnect with the Sadducees.
Yeah.
The Pharisees, on the other hand, I find the Pharisees really interesting. And the Pharisees are kind of like they're the bad guy. They're the boogeyman. Often. They're sort of set up as the bad guys. But I think what's really interesting about the Pharisees in this context is that, you know, they're actually quite popular, right? You know, the Pharisees are the ones who are, I mean, I would say middle class, but I don't know if middle class applies in this context. But they are trying to challenge the power of the Sadducees, because the Sadducees in their temple are creating this situation where you know, all the money goes through them, all the power goes through them. They design the temple. They are running everything. And the Pharisees say you shouldn't have to go to Jerusalem in order to be a religious and holy person. So they want to bring Torah out into the among the people, right, away from the temple.
This comes with some great things because it hopefully will break the power of the Sadducees and allow people access to religious faith and religious tradition in a way that they don't have if they can't go to Jerusalem.
Anyone should be able to read Torah.
Exactly. And that means everyone has to read Torah.
Everyone has to read Torah. And if you're not reading it, it's your fault.
Right. And so we end up with these purity laws and a whole lot of other
because it's not just about reading Torah, it's about being holy.
Right. You have to follow all of these rules because that's who we are.
Right. And so these rules, the rules like the Sabbath, keeping the Sabbath, rules about what you can eat and when you can eat it, but also how you have to clean yourself before you eat, right? The ritual washing and all that sort of stuff, which, you know, I was thinking about this just in the context of drought.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have that kind of water.
If you have to go and actually get every bit of water you use from the local river, washing your hands is a burden. Yes,
and the water from the river might not exactly be right. You have to do certain things with the water, and it's not just washing your hands. If you accidentally touch the wrong thing, then you have to wash your whole. So there is water. There's also the demands of field work, right? You know, I can't take the day off.
Right.
Sorry. You know,
the cows don't care that it's the Sabbath day.
It's calving season. I'm not going to let that cow die just because it's Sunday.
Yeah.
Or that calf, right? So these purity laws, and I think that what really exacerbated the purity laws was the fact that the Pharisees were just sort of like, and if you're not keeping these laws, then you are impure, you're unholy. And so the Pharisees, and this is the thing that connects the Pharisees and the Sadducees, is that the Pharisees were also urban.
Yes.
Right? The Pharisees, they weren't, politically connected and rich like the Sadducees, but they were still urban.
They are the urban intellectual elites instead of the wealthy elites.
Yes, they're the smart ones.
Yeah.
They're the ones
who've spent the time studying the text, understanding the text, and telling everyone else, you need to do this as well.
And you have this interesting conflict between the intellectual class and the elites, right? Yeah. Which, I think we're both obviously tempted to go off and talk about that a little bit, but that would detract from the point that we wanted to make today, which is the Pharisees, despite their reputation, they're very well-meaning.
Yes.
Right? They want to bring religion back to the people.
Absolutely.
They're trying to solve a problem, But the problem is that they're making it worse, mostly because they don't understand rural life. Right. They are sitting there, maybe not in Jerusalem, but a suburb of Jerusalem, right? And they are just clueless. Well, what do you mean you don't have water?
They're hoping to make things better. They're hoping to make things easier. And what they end up doing is contributing to that grinding down. One more thing you got to do. One more thing you got to take care of. One more thing that you just can't let slide.
And then you have to tithe. Right? So it really just becomes this system, and this is exactly what Jesus looks at when he sees these people have been ground down, and they've been ground down physically, the Amharites. They have been ground down physically and spiritually, and largely, and this is that interesting thing, because of this distinction between the urban people who are creating the framework for value. Right. And then the rural people who are like, yeah, sorry, I got stuff to do. And it's worth noting that the Galileans probably were like, yeah, the Pharisees, they seem all right. Mostly because they'd never met one, right? Because the Pharisees don't make it out that far either. Their ideas do. Because the Galileans were still really focused on their own synagogue, on their own, and they had their own way of doing things. Sounds familiar. They had their own way of doing things, and they didn't really want to be interfered with by those urban intellectuals.
Right.
Who looked down on them anyway.
Yeah. And so you have these people in the rural world who are sheep abandoned by leaders who have the power, the education, the authority, and they are ignoring the needs of the people. They're making their lives worse because they're ignoring what they need. So we set up this big conflict between the urban and the rural, and we want to be careful and say that this is not just a fact of Jewish life in this time. It continues on. Yeah,
it's not like it's going to change, as soon as Jesus comes along. It doesn't change.
Well, and even Christianity in its heritage and its history is very, very urban.
Urban. Even Paul.
Paul goes to visit cities. If you go through his missionary journeys, he visits this city and this city and this city and this city. But even beyond that, when you go to the Apocalypse of John, what we call the Book of Revelation, it is sent to the 7 cities in Asia Minor. It is sent to the cities, not to everyone else.
Not to the rural areas. And, I guess we could speculate a lot about why that would be. But basically what it comes down to is that since Aesop, 2,500 years now, right?
And it's even embedded into our language now. The word that we use for people who are non-Christians is pagan.
Pagan.
And pagan is a Latin term, and it does not mean somebody who doesn't worship Jesus. Pagan is a Latin term that means rural person.
Rural person, yeah.
And so those were the people outside the cities who did not get, especially in the 4th century, after the big upheaval and change with Constantine.
Right.
When all of a sudden the empire was Christian, these people held on to their former beliefs of being Roman, worshiping Roman pantheon, all of those sorts of things. And so they were made fun of as dumb pagans.
Dumb pagans.
And that became the term for people who don't worship Jesus.
So it's Latin for country bumpkin.
I hate to say it, but yes. It very much is.
So this is this sort of context in which we can say, okay, so here we find ourselves, 2 pastors in rural Wyoming, which, if we're going to be honest, are kind of Pharisee adjacent.
Yes.
We're both, educated. We went to college, we went to graduate school, we're trained theologically. Yep. And here we are. And I think our choice is we can either be the Pharisees and tell these people, well, this is the way it should be. Go ahead and do what I tell you.
Here's the urban framework. Now
which
just
is the
make it work.
Urban framework, because the powers that be said this, or there's this other way to do it.
Yeah.
I think.
And so part of what we're hoping to do is live into that other way of doing things.
And it's kind of interesting because the way Jesus responds in this text, right?
Jesus responds with compassion. Right. He does not say, oh man, these guys just have everything wrong and I just need to come in here and fix it.
People, listen up.
He sends out people to go
Yes.
and love them. And these people themselves are almost certainly part of that Am Haaretz.
Yeah,
they are the people of the land.
were fishers of fish before they became fishers of men.
Absolutely. Fishermen, rural laborers. And they says, you go to the lost sheep, you know where they are.
You are the lost sheep. Go preach to your brothers and sisters.
And so it's not just even a spiritual thing, it is a physical thing as well, because this is a physical grinding down as well as a religious grinding down.
So thus, he says, minister to them, right? Heal, bind their wounds, heal the sick. In other places, visiting people in prison and all the things that we do, but also bring the good news.
Yeah.
That religious burden that is put on you is just, irrelevant. You don't need to be ground down that way.
And so the harassed and the helpless, the ground down, become the laborers in the new harvest, the new way of doing things. Right. They're not just found, they are commissioned.
Yes.
They're sent out to go and do things in this world that needs them.
So this is, we looked at this text and you and I were kind of thinking about, how do we want to kick this off and how do we want to use this framework? And this just happened to be the text for in the lectionary for the Sunday after we do this. And so it seemed sort of like kind of a sign, because I do think that there are strong connections between what is happening here, this disconnect between the urban and the rural, and Jesus' response to it. I do think it's really easy to identify. I find it sometimes, when I go to conference meetings or stuff like that, and someone says something, and whoever's there from our congregation, we'll just look at each other and roll our eyes. It's like, there they go again. They have no idea what they're talking about. It's all this kind of, the land and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I mean, it's just, it's not worth talking to them. I mean, I hate to say it, it's not worth talking to them, because I would be exhausted. I would be ground down by just having to correct all the misconceptions that sometimes well-meaning urban Christians have about rural life. So I do think that rural congregations are often failed by institutions whose structural assumptions are based on urban issues, urban concerns, and urban life. So you sort of have the Sadducees with their headquarters, and theologians are no worse. There's not a whole lot of country theologians out there anymore. If they started out there, they moved to the city, which Aesop did too. They moved to the city, and again, these people are not evil. They're just out of touch.
Yeah. So the challenge we're going to try and live into now is to start with listening. Not with explaining, not with helping, accompanying these people and listening to what's actually going on.
Yeah.
And then responding.
So instead of going into an area and saying, oh, here's your issues, and going into it, so what are your issues? Yeah. And how do you experience them? And then maybe waiting a couple minutes before you come up with a solution.
Yeah, and that is one of those things which, as the intellectual elites, right, the immediate...
I know that.
Oh, yeah, I know how to fix this. I know exactly what to do. The knee-jerk reflex response is right there. And so what we need to do is need to take a step back and accompany and listen and say, okay, what does this say in this place and in this time, as opposed to, with all my knowledge and all my experience and all of my very urban experience, what does this text say in this place?
Yes.
How do we contextualize this here? And what this story says is that what we need laborers for the field. We need people to go out and do the work and not just say, well, here, I've got a new way of doing it.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of an interesting thing that happens, because I think it's easy as a rural pastor to sort of say, yep, those city folk need to listen, right? And it's a little bit harder, but I think it's still there in me. It's like, and I need to listen. I need to listen to my congregation. I need to listen to the people that are my neighbors, instead of thinking that my issues are the issues. But I think that what's interesting is that the flip side of that is that The story doesn't end with Jesus saying, you guys are so harassed. Here, let me help you. It ends with the commissioning, that he turns to the disciples who are themselves those rural folk and says, go out.
You have something to contribute.
You have something to contribute. Find those people so that the harassed and the helpless basically become the laborers for the church. And so I think it's important for those of us in rural congregations, as I said, to take rural concerns seriously, but also to not think that it's just our problems, right? We have a lot to contribute to the broader church, right? I think about this a lot because, the churches are taking all of these environmental stances. And I'm like, where are the farmers? Where are the ranchers? Where are the people who are living on the land, who are working the land, who know the land, who understand the land, not just as a vacation spot of grandeur, but have an actual relationship with a place. These people, us, we have something to contribute to the conversation. And so rural pastors like you and I who are Pharisees, right? I think we have an obligation, we have a responsibility, and we're in a position where we can, tell the church to shut up, and try to do that work of translation, if that's not too weird a term to use here.
So we do think that Wyoming has a lot to offer the broader church, but we have to be open to listening and having a conversation instead of just, oh, here, I know what to do.
Yeah.
We have to come at it with some humility,
yeah.
which is not always the Pharisees' strong point.
It's not the Pharisee way.
So are we willing to have this conversation?
Yeah, and I mean, as you said, this is really kind of what prompted us to do this show, not just locally, because we're hoping that local people would say, "Boy, you got that wrong," or whatever issues that you think need to be addressed. I mean, I think those are things that we want to educate ourselves about, and by that also educating the broader church.
Yeah, we want to tell this story.
Yes.
Because stories matter.
Yes, the story of the people here.
And we got to tell stories, not just here are some facts.
Right.
So we hope that you will keep joining us. We'll be Monday morning at 11:30 on KYCN, or if you can't make that, we'll have it on ttandt.org or in whatever podcast app you use these days. You'll find us at Talk and Tumbleweeds.
So it's TT and spell out the and t.org.
Yes.
And that will take you where you need to go, links to the podcast and everything.
Yes.
Sometime in the next few weeks, Tim Milligan, who is a pastor at the Cowboy Church up in Glendo, is going to come talk to us, and really looking forward to learning a little bit about his perspective and what it means to be a rancher as a theologian or theologian rancher. I'm not sure how that goes. To think about the land not just as a livelihood, but as a spiritual foundation, and also we'll have a representative from Catholic Charities who will talk about some of the work that they do, some of the experiences of Catholic brothers and sisters here in rural Wyoming.
That's Table Talk and Tumbleweeds for this week. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you want to keep listening, we'll be on 11:30 KYCN. Find us on the website or on podcast apps.
And we'd love to have you join us for worship at the Wheatland UCC. We worship at 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings.
And if you're willing to get up a little earlier, 9 o'clock at Covenant Lutheran Church.
Table Talk and Tumbleweeds is a ministry of the Wheatland United Church of Christ and Covenant Lutheran Church, also in Wheatland, Wyoming. And it's made possible by an In the Mud grant from the United Church of Christ. Until next time, this is Pastor Lisa.
And this is Pastor Joshua.
And remember, everyone is welcome at this table.